do you think the government of India will release?
How do you go about in solving this?
Did you receive any feedback from somebody?
A big leap from the normal thing that happens.
Yes.
On the environmental science curriculum for
Kuzuzangpo and welcome to BBS. I'm Sonam Rinchen. In today's program, BBS will bring you a discussion on the controversy surrounding Fiscal Incentives Bill 2017. And to discuss on this issue, I'm joined by the opposition leader, Dr. Pema Gyamtsho. Your Excellency, thank you for joining us on this program. Your Excellency, before we touch on the issue of legality, let us start with the fiscal to create awareness, basically to create awareness on the fiscal incentives. I think people are not much aware of what exactly is fiscal incentives. And fiscal incentives, I think it's being started by the deputy government in 2010 and it's being followed by the present government. If you could tell us the importance of fiscal incentives before.
Yes. Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank BBS once again and also thank you, Sonam, for giving me this opportunity to clarify on behalf of the opposition party. Now, coming straight to your question, I think that is one of the main problems, that fiscal incentives are misunderstood. Sometimes we mix it with taxes and other levies. So incentive, you should understand, is to stimulate, as the government has mentioned, and as we have mentioned also, to stimulate economic growth. That means to attract investments in a sector that has got very good potential in future to generate employment, to generate income, to boost our economic growth. Now, it doesn't mean alteration of taxes on existing businesses, on existing schemes, and then it doesn't become an incentive. But what we have seen is that there is a mix of incentives for new investments, new ideas, new schemes, new businesses, and doing away with taxes on existing businesses and existing schemes. And that is where the mix-up is. And one should very clearly understand that incentives are meant for those areas where we see a lot of potential. But either we do not have in-house capacity, financial resources, and then we have to encourage people to invest or attract foreign direct investment there. For example, the high-end hotels, five-star hotels. I don't think we have the resources internally to construct such high-end hotels. Therefore, we need to give incentives. And there's a lot of risk involved, because if somebody wants to make fast money, they can easily invest in, construction of buildings, rent them out, earn income from day one. But with high-end hotels, it's very risky. I think it takes a long time before they could recover the cost. So those are areas where we need to invest. Now, if you look at this, there are mix-up of everything. For example, incentives are even being provided in sectors where we do not need to attract more investment. The taxi, the transport sector, we have already a situation where there is already overcrowding. Now, there we may even have to disincentivize with taxes. But here, the problem is because of this mix.
Your Excellency, don't you think that tax exemptions granted to some of the most lucrative businesses are irrational when common people are faced with numerous taxes? For instance, we say Sate, Gungte, and now it comes to even communication tax. Don't you think it's irrational when you grant incentives to some of the lucrative businesses?
Yes. Now, this is something very misleading. And it has been highlighted because it has been singled out. This is not the case, neither in the case of the former government's proposal, nor in the case of the present proposal. There is a range of incentives being provided for all categories. But the problem is this time we did not have the luxury of discussing the section by section, provision by provision. Therefore, I don't know whether people really understand what is actually there in the incentive package, because it was not discussed in Parliament. And I don't think this document.
I will come to later. We will discuss on this.
So just to summarize, I think the incentives actually provide not just for the rich, but for all categories.
Yeah.
So that is very misleading to say that it's only for the rich.
Yes. Let's now touch on the legality issue. With regard to fiscal incentives, Bill 2017, Your Excellency, do you think that the government violated the constitution by imposing fiscal incentives without passing it through the parliament? Because recently the Prime Minister said there is no word for legality question. There is no question for legality, and the Druk Phuensum Tshogpa says the government have violated the constitution. What's your view on this?
Okay, I think once the government has acknowledged or accepted that this is a money bill, then the question of legality doesn't arise. It is illegal what they have done. So if they have the confidence to say that they have not breached the constitution, then they have the numbers to say that fiscal incentive is not a money bill and pass it as a report. But that didn't happen. So once they have accepted it as a money bill, there is no question of asking whether it is a money bill, whether it is legal or illegal. It is illegal.
Druk Phuensum Tshogpa also says that the interpretation of the Supreme Court's decision on fiscal incentives, I think fiscal incentives is wrong by the Prime Minister. What do you say on this?
Well, I think what they said is correct. What DNT said is correct. I have a copy of the verdict, and our understanding is that because that time we also proposed a similar report actually, but there was a mix of incentives and tax, just as is in this case.
Yes.
That is why the opposition that time took us to court, and the court has come out, the Supreme Court has come out with the final verdict saying that although they interpret the fiscal incentives also as a money bill and unconstitutional, at that time the opposition has not raised it or not raised any objection. However, it is explicitly clear that in future it should be passed by the parliament like any other money bill.
Yes. With regard to tabling the bill, Prime Minister said the reason for tabling the fiscal incentives policy as a bill is basically is that it will be dangerous if left in the hands of the government. Is it true?
I don't think that was true. At that time, when we were debating in the parliament, it didn't come out like that.
Yes.
Now, if that is their concern, then they should have tabled it already as a money bill. That did not happen. It happened only because the committee, the finance committee, actually came around and changed it from submitting it as a report to a money bill.
Yes.
And also confirmed that. And then the speaker and the members also interpreted the Supreme Court's verdict as well as the Constitution and other acts. And it was made very clear that it should be tabled as a money bill. And it's not because they are worried about future governments. If that is the concern, then they would not have accepted. I mean, just to correct that, if that is the concern, then they should have, as I said earlier, tabled it already as a money bill.
Yes. Now, when it comes to money bill, as far as I know, I think we will have to, the parliamentarians will have to deliberate, discuss, debate, close by close. Did it happen in the parliament?
That did not happen.
What was the reason behind?
When this was tabled together with the budget bill, the annual budget, and the pay commission's report, we had time actually to only debate on whether it is a report or a money bill. So the whole debate was centered around that. And finally, it was acknowledged that this is a money bill. Then when it came to actual discussion on the content, we did not have time at all. So it was adopted in the National Assembly because of the fact that they have more members. And as you know, the opposition was against it.
Yes.
The opposition didn't support because we insisted that we should discuss it clause by clause, provision by provision.
Yes.
And because of that, the bill was never understood. The content, the provisions of the bill was never understood correctly.
Yes. The National Council, with regard to the fiscal incentives, the National Council deliberated thoroughly, and the recommendations were forwarded to the National Assembly. And the National Council were a little bit upset because their recommendations were not discussed and they were in the parliament. How true is it, La? Because the Prime Minister recently said that they discussed the whole session.
That is also absolutely false. It's not true. What we discussed are the recommendations of the National Council on the annual budget 2017-18 and on the Pay Commission's report on the revision of the local government salary.
Yes.
Those recommendations were tabled and we discussed thoroughly. But when it came to the money bill, when it came to the fiscal incentives, we did not discuss at all. What we said was, when the National Council rejected the bill as a whole, what legitimacy do we have to discuss the bill again? Because it was not discussed earlier and it was not fully supported by the opposition. So unless we have the opportunity to discuss it thoroughly along with the comments, the observations and recommendations of the National Council and be able to change, then there is no point in discussing. So that is why there was no discussion. In any case, if the government has acknowledged that when the opposition raised objections and when the National Council rejected the whole bill, which never happened before, the government of the day should have been open for discussion on it and made the amendments and corrected it. But that did not happen because they insisted that they have the power. The National Assembly, for that matter, has the authority to pass money bill.
I'm sure you might have received the recommendations submitted by the National Council. What were some of the recommendations submitted by the National Council to the Assembly?
Okay, now specific recommendations I don't think we need to go into, but they have 4 general observations, major concerns. And one, how would these fiscal incentives address the question of regional balanced development? One question. And also, as you mentioned earlier, how would it bridge the gap between the rich and the poor? It's not very clear. That was what they said. Second, did we account for the revenue that we would lose through such incentives? Because it almost covers everything. And if we exempt taxes on everything, even businesses that are doing well, then how are we going to raise our income, raise our revenue? So that is one another concern. And again, they have also expressed concern that the economic development policy was not thoroughly reviewed and researched. And they have serious doubts on the quality of the economic development policy that this government brought out also this year. And finally, again, one mistake that we made earlier, which we tried to rectify later, is the specificities. Because in the fiscal incentives, we have very general provisions. But when you go for implementations, then we need the specific areas which are eligible for exemption. And those are not given. So they also thought that list is missing, and that is what they mentioned. These were the 4 major concerns that they expressed.
Thank you. Your Excellency, talking about the gap between the rich and the poor, when the deputy government was in power, did the government review as to how the fiscal incentive has narrowed the gap between the rich and the poor, and also who has benefited the most?
Okay. Now, incentives, we have to look at the objective of the incentive. The objective of the incentive is to incentivize business schemes, enterprises where they do not exist, but where there is great opportunity. Now, if you talk about organic agriculture, is incentivized. Agriculture products is incentivized, is benefiting the common people. And also the bus services, those were incentivized, and those are addressing the needs of the common people. Now it cannot be in isolation with the overall development plan, economic development plan. Now to address rural poverty, for example, we need to first of all establish the ground conditions on which the rural communities should prosper. Therefore, the government has focused, our government, I would say, in our term has focused on connecting the villages, farm roads, taking roads everywhere, bringing electricity to everyone's home, bringing telecommunications, mobile phones, every corner, nook and corner of the country. And those are the ground conditions on which people should build the further growth. Get into enterprises that would generate income, that would generate employment and so on. So we have, for example, brought down the poverty level from around 32% to 12% during our term. That's a huge achievement.
Yes.
And I must say, the present government didn't believe that. So they had a survey done to confirm that. And their own studies, their own survey confirmed that the poverty level now at the start of this plan was brought down to 12%.
Your Excellency, Deputy Government granting fiscal incentives 3 days before dissolving the government. What was the reason behind? The Deputy Government had all the time, we had 5 years, but you at last 3 days before dissolving the government. Why?
Okay, that is another sensational statement made by the Prime Minister. Actually, one would not expect naming of individuals or institutions from a person of that stature, the level of Prime Minister. Nevertheless, it has happened, and there's nothing to do with providing a special package for one of our members. It was not about conflict of interest. It is, we have the authority, the government of the day has the authority to take decisions till the last day, the last hour if need be. But this is not a new thing that we introduced in 2013. It was an implementation with clarity on the fiscal incentives already approved in 2010.
Yeah.
So here if you go to the tourism sector, is section 3.3 tourism sector, 3.31 clearly states a 10-year income tax holiday to newly established high-end hotels will be provided. So it's clearly given there. It's not something that we cooked up 3 days before the dissolution of our government, and which was the message that was conveyed, unfortunately. What has happened is the implementing agencies like the Tourism Council, excuse me, the Hotel Association of Bhutan, the Private Sector Development Committee, the Department of Trade and Industries, the Revenue and Customs Department, when they were trying to implement these fiscal policies that were already approved in 2010, they lacked specificities, specifics.
Yeah.
Now, even if you look at the present bill, it is full of generalities, tax incentives, sales tax and customs duty exemption to the agriculture sector, it is given here. Now, how do you implement that? So, basically, based on the note sheet put up by these agencies to the Ministry of Finance, and in turn put up to the Cabinet by the Finance Ministry to provide clarity, a notice and letter was issued from the Ministry of Finance on how to implement the provisions which were already approved in 2010. So there was no such thing as a new tax incentive being introduced 3 days before the dissolution of our government.
Some of the members and some even observers and also the National Council members says that fiscal incentives granted by the government prior to the approval of the present money bill is subject to full recovery. What do you say on this?
Yes, I think the due process of law should be followed. The money bill will come into effect the day it is introduced in the parliament. So the present money bill, the present fiscal incentives will become effective only from May 8, 2017. But because the government has already launched these incentives from January 2016, whatever exemptions that they have provided, I think becomes illegal. And it's not the fault of the people. They are not aware of that. I think the government should take responsibility, and the law will take care of what to do next.
Many people say it's a fiscal incentives is all about political motivation. So do you think there is a need for more transparency in fiscal incentives granted by the government, be it the DPT or PDP?
Exactly. That is what I think Druk Phuensum Tshogpa is trying to do. That is why the National Council has objected to it, because it was not transparent. Even in the National Assembly, I am still not sure whether many members, or some members at least, would have actually understood what is there in the fiscal incentive package.
Yes.
So there it should be transparent. But having said that, you should also acknowledge that this is nothing new. Fiscal incentives have been provided even in the 90s, starting from the 90s, for the tourism sector, hotel sector, for the manufacturing industries and so on. But in 2010, because of the change in governance system, because of our constitution, what we try to do then is to regularize and to formalize the incentives so that there is a system rather than providing incentives on an ad hoc basis. And now this system is being clearer and clearer, that it should be introduced as a money bill, and it should be transparent, and it should be endorsed by the parliament. So I think we have come a long way, but it is wrong to assume that we did not have fiscal incentives before 2010. It was always there.
Now, if you have to recover, what do you say about the 2010 granting fiscal incentives in 2010, 2013 and 12?
I'm sure you must have gone through the content of the court's verdict. Now, as far as we understand, the verdict clearly says that any form of taxes, levies, fees are to be interpreted as a money bill, which means it has to be approved by the parliament, endorsed by the parliament. Now, in the case of the 2010, the court has ruled that because the opposition of the day, of that time, when they filed the court case, they did not raise any objection to the fiscal incentives. And since it was already being implemented also, that as a one time, the way we understood, that for the time being, because there were no objections raised by the appellant, in which case the opposition of that time, then the court deemed it that the fiscal incentives that we have proposed could continue. But that gives no reason for the present government to come out again with a similar proposal, which is a mix of incentives and taxes. Now, to us, it is clearly an alteration of taxes.
Yes.
Now, alteration of taxes doesn't mean only upward alteration, upward raising of taxes, as understood by the Prime Minister, the way I understood him. Alteration of taxes means both revising upwards or downwards.
Yes.
Now, in this case, there are two things. Some new schemes, new sectors, where we want the private sector or parties, we want to encourage them to get into it, then I think it is justified to introduce as incentives. But then what to do with the existing ones in the same areas? Then do away with the taxes altogether? That is alteration of taxes. For example, we are bringing down the taxes from 10% to 0%, which is alteration. So it is not just upward revision, it is also reducing an exemption of existing taxes that we are arguing about. It's not about new schemes where we need to give them tax holidays.
Yes. Your Excellency, I don't have much questions. If you have anything to say, I'll give you a minute or two. Final word.
Thank you very much. And I think it is very important for everybody to understand, as you mentioned in the beginning, the meaning and purpose of fiscal incentives. And as long as it is well intended, as well as it is transparent, as well as it benefits everyone and not limited to one or two individuals, which is the case with all the incentives, it is open for every who needs to avail of these incentives. Yes. And we have not denied anyone from availing those incentives. Then it is a very important element of boosting our economic growth, of helping the implementation of the economic development policy. Now, what is regrettable is the present government didn't bring out the economic development policy until January this year, 2017, but introduced the fiscal incentives, which is supposed to be an instrument for implementing the EDP in January 2016. Now, that places a big question mark. In our case, we brought both the EDB in 2010 and also the fiscal incentive package to support it in 2010. If that has happened, then this whole issue may not have come up.
Yes. Your Excellency, thank you so much for being here and speaking on talking on the purpose of the fiscal incentives and also clarifying some of the issues with regard to fiscal incentives. Your Excellency, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for watching the program.
So do you think the government of India will release?
How do you go about in solving this?
Did you receive any feedback from somebody?
A big leap from the normal thing that happens in
On the environmental science curriculum for